So what I want to look at here is how can I make, with colored pencil techniques, how can I make either one of these more interesting? Well, there's a couple ways. One is I can use colors that are similar to the colors that I've used there and create a colored pencil gradient. In the demonstration, you see that I have adding and subtracting pressure to any color, whatever color I'm using, it doesn't really matter with colored pencil, to create an interesting gradation, which is a color value scale. I'll press really, really hard on one area and then slowly, slowly, slowly lessen pressure to create that smooth transition of color value. All right, we're going to be doing a lot of this in the months to come. All right, so I go from a darker value of the color and transition it to a lighter color. In these small areas, I might want to consider more of something that's a little more along the lines of a highlight. So what looks more interesting? If I take, and in this case a highlight, I'm using white. If I take a white colored pencil and I do a subtle gradient technique up against this edge, right? So I'm alternating edges with my white colored pencil. And I can do it on top of the green because highlights over marker generally go over any color you're working with, right? Now if I create that highlight and then I put a little bit of that gradation or that transition in value into that color, so it doesn't stay like a solid white pencil line, it creates a highlight on that edge of color. In this case, this could be the background in yours, right, where you might have some of those contouring lines. What looks like it has a little bit more visual interest in here? Obviously, in most cases, most people would say the one that you've created some interesting highlight on. Now, there's not the only way, it just doesn't have to be highlight. I could create some visual interest with a darker colored pencil on top of, in this case, I've got a darker green on top of a slightly lighter green. So I'm creating a little bit of like an implied shadow at the bottom of these forms with a little bit of a gradient technique, a little bit of extra pressure up against the line, and then slowly blend it out. If I have possibly have a darker red colored pencil or any darker, in this case I'm using a dark brown. Dark brown over red just creates a little bit of a shade of red. And this is obviously over marker, right? I could create a little bit of a gradation with this marker overshading technique and just accurately create an interesting area of difference or value change. Look at how much more interesting those areas look just because I added some visible colored pencil techniques. All right, visible colored pencil techniques. That's the most important part. And with the figure that I sketched there, right, I drew one of the herring figures there. You know, let's say for example I take a dark green and make it appear as if there's a shadow behind or below this character, as if he's running across. I could use the colored pencil, and I just created with a darker green version of the colored pencil. All right, I'm just creating this implied cast shadow below the form, right? Obviously I need more marker over here, but I'm creating that implied cast shadow, which is going to make the subject, the overall subject, appear to have more depth. All right? So you can do it without marker. If you don't have the markers that you did on the assignment, you can just do certain areas of gradient technique, which are going to allow for some interesting depth and contrast. And some of the other comments that I made on students' projects were, I didn't really see a whole lot of intensity. All right? Intensity is the visual brightness of a color. So if some of the characters have an intense version of the color, that's going to be more interesting to look at than if you just kind of put in some kind of a faint meh version of the color. All right. All of Keith Haring's forms have that solid, bold, bright representation of whatever color they are. So you don't have to mess too much with the forms themselves, but think about how you can add depth and overall interest in the the overall design, and make it more informational, make it more interesting and creative as far as creating depth, as far as creating areas of highlight, as far as creating areas of cast or implied cast shadow. Okay, I didn't do anything on these characters because I wanted them to be flat. I wanted them to be sort of mundane and the same as far as based on my theme. All right, so keep all of that in mind as you guys continue on. As you continue on with part 3, this is my finished piece for part 3 prior to getting to the trucks and wheels. Okay? And of course, there's probably some things that I could do in here to make it more interesting visually, but I did the highlights here, I did gradations here, I did some gradients and highlights in here on the television, I did a cast shadow, implied cast shadow there. So, that's part of making the design overall that much more interesting.